As we conclude J.D. Vance's Hillbilly Elegy, and you begin your own nonfiction writing, I wanted to look in particular at this time about how Vance develops aspects of theme within the memoir. And so we're going to look at a particular scene here, a particular episode. Vance explores various kinds of themes within the book. The theme of identity, what does it mean to be a hillbilly, as he says. On page 148, he sets up the tensions between the self-reliant and hard-working aspects of that identity versus the more kind of consumerist or isolated aspects of that identity. He also explores in terms of identity the place or culture's role in defining him, right? That he himself is a citizen of Middle Tucky. In what ways does that culture or place leave a stamp on who he is? And what are the demands of economic class here for Vance in assuming this identity? Does he ever escape from the more negative aspects of identity here? He also explores the impact of violence, abuse, and addiction on himself personally and within the culture. He does this in various ways, like he examines Mama as a character. At one point he calls her, a feared lunatic within the family. In what ways does her sense of being a point of stability for him, and also, his own sense of fear of and anxiety about, what aspects of her character or culture leave its mark on him as he continues to develop and grow. He also talks about, the challenges of writing as an intense, indescribable anxiety as he describes, his past and his culture. A culture that, one of its basic virtues is, right, that you don't talk about family, that you don't reveal aspects of your family. In what ways does the writing itself offer a challenge or attention to him? And he writes about his mother's addiction in the end, right, that fear of not escaping its influence or effect. In what ways is he still psychologically marked by addiction? And one aspect of the memoir that doesn't get as much space is the question of how race works here. On page 190, 191, he writes that Obama strikes at our deepest insecurities. So in what ways does race offer an aspect of experience for Vance that remains perhaps in some ways unexplored or unaddressed within the writing? What tensions do those raise for you as a reader? The themes offer various aspects or various levels of impact on the writing itself. They offer points of focus, that is, how does the writer here recover those shaping influences on him as he grows and develops? They set up characters within the narrative itself, right? How he interacts with Mama, his mom, his sister, etc. How does he define himself within those interactions? There's the psychological impact of violence and addiction upon him as a theme. In what ways does he escape or not escape those impacts? And they set up a basic kind of narrative tension overall. Is Vance's story one of escape? Does he, by the end, escape from the more negative influences of place or culture? In how how is his identity shaped here in the end? One of the challenges in terms of theme is, does that mean that you have a moral to this story, right? Is this the story of Vance's eventual escape? Sarah Jones critiques this, right, in her review of Vance. It's available also on pages here, where she points out various parts of Vance's story as kind of being self-triumphalistic in a way, perhaps, right? That his escape is not completely based in his self-reliance, but he's helped along the way by community. And so what ways does Vance perhaps ignore those aspects of the story? Vance at one point says he doesn't believe in epiphanies, right? Those moments of clear-sightedness in life. But does he ultimately believe that there are points in his life where there's turnarounds? And does he understand what turned him around in those moments? Those are the questions that Jones asks in terms of themes here. The scene I'd like for you to look at in particular here is on pages 130 and 132. I'll read a few passages from it and we'll look at some various aspects of it. It's a scene where, as Vance writes, Mama learned the truth when Mom came to me one morning demanding a jar of clean urine. It's at the top of page 130. I stayed at Mama's the night before and was getting ready for school when Mom walked in, frantic and out of breath. She had to submit to random urinalysis from the nursing board in order to keep her license, and someone had called that morning demanding a sample by the end of the day. Mama's piss was dirty with a half dozen prescription drugs, so I was the only candidate. So you have this moment, right, where Vance is going to describe this episode where his mom needs a clean urine sample and he gets asked for it. So as he describes this episode, there are going to be various points of conflict and interaction that's going to be described in it. You're going to see Vance, his mother, and Mama as characters as they work through this scene. There'll be points of dialogue here. And we'll also see points of exploration of Vance's internal world, right? His kind of reflections on not only in the moment, but also in flashback as he looks back on this scene as a memory and how it influenced his present life. You get to a point of resolution by the end where Vance kind of shrugs his shoulders and says, at least she passed her piss test. And so, does that offer a genuine point of resolution or not in the end? To explore this as an episode and with particular themes, we can note from the beginning that it has a clear setting, right? That there's a moment where she comes to him and demands a urine sample. In the end, this is addressed with direct conflict between the characters within the scene. I refused, Vance writes. So we have a very kind of clear sense of conflict of whether or not he is going to give up to his mother's wishes and how he's going to define himself in that surrender. One of the levels of conflict here is also a family conflict, right? Where he directly addresses Mama. In the end, at the bottom of 130, he writes, I exploded. I told Mom that if she wanted clean piss, she should stop fucking up her life and get it from her own bladder. I told Mama that enabling Mom made it worse, and that if she had put her foot down 30 years earlier, then maybe Mom wouldn't be begging her son for clean piss. I told Mom that she was a shitty mother, and I told Mama that she was a shitty mother too. And the color drained from Mama's face, and she refused even to look me in the eye. What I had said had clearly struck a nerve. So you have the stakes are kind of raised in terms of conflict. It becomes a conflict not only between mother and son, but conflict within the family, conflict within the culture, right? In some ways in which Vance is starting to realize that, what ways does the culture enable this addiction? And then finally you have the sense of internal conflict within Vance himself, as he begins to, as he finally does surrender a urine sample for his mother to submit. He writes near the bottom of 131, it was the eternal hope, the thing to which I couldn't say no. That hope drove me to voluntarily attend those many Narcotics Anonymous meetings that consume books on addiction and participate in Mom's treatment to the fullest extent that I could. It had driven me to get into the car with her when I was 12, knowing that her emotional state could lead her to do something she'd regret later. Mama never lost that hope. After more heartache and more disappointment than I could possibly fathom, her life was a clinic in how to lose faith in people. But Mama always found a way to believe in the people she loved, so I don't regret relenting. Giving Mom that piss was wrong, but I'll never regret following Mama's lead. Her hope allowed her to forgive Papa after the rough years of their marriage, and it convinced her to take me in when I needed her most. And so in what ways does Vance see himself being defined within the cultural and familial norms that are here in what ways does his identity spring from this moment? There are a lot of tensions within his decision, right? In terms of his self-definition, he kind of reveals the complexities of Mama's character, right? That you almost see that Mama has some regret in terms of she's raised her daughter, as well as some kind of simmering anger there, right? That Vance confronts her in a way. You also see Vance's own sense of identity developing, right? When he realizes that his own urine might not be clean because of some of the marijuana he had smoked, and also that he's starting to draw a line here in terms of identity, where he says, "I hated Mom for her addiction," on page 132. And so he begins to draw lines of self-definition here in this episode. In terms of the themes explored within this episode, again, the themes involve Vance's sense of family and place here, right? In what ways does he embrace Mama's influence? In what ways does he start to realize that he has to hold certain aspects of it at arm's length if he wants to survive and develop? It's also a very good episode in terms of, I think, rethinking kind of addiction's impact upon the family and self. In what ways is addiction a more complex question than just choice in some ways? In what ways does the culture and family play a role in Vance's mother's sense of addiction here? And also the sense of self-reliance that Vance speaks of in terms of identity of the hillbilly culture, right? In what ways does Vance start to feel himself more or less self-reliant in this episode? He speaks of that eternal hope, right? Is that eternal hope one that is a moment of resolution, right, where he is going to be connected to family in the end, or does that sense of eternal hope set up a challenge for him, that he hopes to kind of find a new way of understanding or new way of dealing with as he defines himself in the end? So these are a couple of themes that are explored within that particular episode, themes that Vance will come back to again and again within the memoir.